Welcome to Sense and Sustainability, your podcast channel for sustainable procurement. We hope you like what you hear. Please go to www.iso2400.org for more information, learning resources, tools, and much more.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Sean McCarthy. I'm the Director of Action Sustainability Community Interest Company, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Graeme and Laurence from the UK. Welcome.
Hi there.
So, guys, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, your organisation, and your careers, and how you became involved in sustainable procurement?
Hi everyone, I'm Graeme Hayes. I'm Director of Sustainable Innovation at Litmus Sustainability. I've been working in the sustainability space for around 15 years now, starting in industry, then spending a long time in academia where I got a PhD in sustainable business, and then I've moved back into industry again, helping businesses of all different shapes and sizes, from global banks to SMEs and micro businesses, essentially helping them to understand what sustainability means and why it's important to them and what they can do in their businesses to sort of reduce risk and try to identify opportunities that lie in the sustainability space. Because as the UK is transitioning towards net zero, that means the world's changing, and that usually means that there's opportunities for innovation and doing exciting things. So that's where I work, and I met Laurence a few years ago and we decided to start a business together called Litmus. I'll let you introduce yourself, Laurence.
Yeah, hi everybody. So as you just heard, Graeme's the clever one with the PhD. I've worked in sustainability with, or mostly SMEs, for about 10 years now, focusing mostly on climate issues, carbon issues. My background's a little bit different. My career background, a lot of it comes from communications actually, which is quite relevant to this conversation. So a real passion of mine is helping organizations become climate influencers in their networks. So being able to share best practice and talk to other stakeholders, whether that's customers or suppliers, employees, and other groups, to be able to sort of think of yourself as a system essentially, and not just think about sustainability within your own four walls. So that's sort of my bag. Yeah, it was a funny story. I mean, myself and Graeme, we knew each other sort of in passing, didn't we? Because the Manchester sustainability community is fairly small in that everybody seems to know each other. But we were at a networking event and realised in a short conversation that we lived about a minute's walk from each other, and then inevitably ended up in the pub having a conversation. And here we are today with company Litmus Sustainability. So we've been running for about 18 months now, getting on for 18 months. So we're quite young. I suppose the best way to describe us, we provide a suite of sustainability services, all the way from carbon reduction plans, footprinting, emissions reporting, to training, executive education, mentoring for people that are new into sustainability roles in organizations. And we're very agnostic on sector and company size. We work with one-man bands all the way up to large corporates, manufacturers, service providers, all sorts of industries. And we really set the business up with a mind to being able to help organizations become the partner of choice. So as we transition to a low carbon economy, how can we become that organization that everybody wants to work with, whether that is customer, whether that's employee, investor? You know, it's all about being a good partner in this the sort of sustainability transition. And we wanted to make it very much a human consultancy. So we very much work on a one-to-one basis. Sometimes I feel like the best way to describe this is a sort of antithesis to the movement towards AI tech platforms. We want to bring it back to the human level and really understand our clients on a one-to-one basis and really get to know them. I suppose that's a good introduction to Litmus, would you say?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the only thing that I add is that we are a sustainability consultancy, pretty much, but we really see ourselves more as a business first sustainability consultancy. Like, we really believe that this is obviously an incredibly important issue, or we wouldn't have dedicated our careers to working in this space. But we understand that for sustainability to work, it has to work for business. So otherwise businesses aren't going to implement X or Y initiative if it's not got some sort of return on investment, or it's got some sort of risk reduction or opportunity for the organisation in some space. So we're always very mindful of, we have to understand our clients well and understand what works for businesses and business in general. Otherwise things aren't going to fly. So that's pretty much central to what we do. But otherwise, yeah, we're just a sustainability consultancy, like many of us out there, I guess.
Thank you. I guess a number of interesting points there, not least AI, but maybe we'll come to that later. So yeah, I'm very interested. I'd say a lot of our audience are people that are interested in sustainable procurement and how you transition up and down the value chain sustainability issues. What do you said you worked a lot with smaller businesses. What do you see as the challenges? I think, Graeme, you made a really good point about you come at this from a business benefit point of view, which is really the only way to do it. You can't tug at people's conscience anymore, or tell them about, oh my God, the world's burning or whatever. People know that, but what's in it for them as their business? Would you like to expand on that a little, maybe with some examples of things that you've done?
Yeah, sure. So I think, we'll both have different things to say on this because there's so many things that we see on a daily basis. I think the main things that we see, or the main challenges, are the overwhelm that people feel with a lot of sustainability work, especially when they're looking at it from a compliance perspective. So we've got so many clients who will just be going about their day, having a wonderful time running their business, and all of a sudden an email comes through that says you've got to now provide us with this bit of data, this bit of an action plan. How are you, or what are your policies against this or this? And a lot of the people working in the sustainability space, because it isn't a new thing anymore, but in terms of the skills gaps that exist and the jobs that people are doing, it sort of is still quite new. A lot of the people working in sustainability are often fresh graduates who know the theory, but maybe they don't have the experience of working in a business, or they're people who are really talented and amazing in their business, and then suddenly they're told that you're now in charge of sustainability for this organization. Or you could be a compliance officer who's, just doing compliance work, and then all of a sudden you've now got to understand how to do a carbon account and how to understand what actions you need to do to help get to net zero. And it's a huge challenge mentally, and it's just a lot of overwhelm as well when people are already busy to have to learn the jargon and the lingo, and then do all the technical work, and then embrace the soft skills as well that you need for sustainability. What we see a lot is a lot of support that focuses on the tech side, and a lot of businesses, they will jump to looking at, say, solar as a way to decarbonize, for example. But a lot of the real skills you need for sustainability are those soft skills in terms of making the business case, talking to your teams, engaging with your teams, speaking to your suppliers, and the whole thing just gets very overwhelming, and that often leads to inaction, or worst case, getting things wrong and then not being compliant. Yeah, if you've got anything to add to that?
Yeah, as I said before, organisations of all sizes, and it's very much the people we have our one-to-one relationship with generally are at the coalface of facing demands or requests from procurement teams from their customers. And the interesting thing is that I don't think there's a huge difference between large businesses or small businesses in the level of confusion that people have. I think there's maybe this assumption that large businesses now should be ready, they should understand the lingo, the acronym soup shouldn't be as much of a challenge. But actually, in our experience, unless you've got an ESG team, which actually is a lot rarer than people think, it's still just as confusing if you're a 100 million turnover business than if you're a small business and it's the managing director having to sort all of this stuff. We see the same levels of confusion and overwhelm. We were talking to a business recently who are getting on for 70, 80 million pound turnover. They've got a global supply chain. They're a product supplier to retailers and to the public sector. And they were saying to us, they're looking at ESG for the first time. They're putting lots of initiatives in place, but they just don't understand some of the questions they're getting asked, even though they spend a lot of time on it, because it's very natural for us in this space to fall into the trap of using jargon. And there's so much jargon, and the stuff that we think is simple, terms like net zero, when we work in this space, that's now not considered jargon to us personally, but 90% of people out there, that's still a huge piece of jargon that people don't understand. And so I think the big thing is still getting our language right in procurement and what we're asking people, and actually not falling into that trap of assuming people know how to respond to a question. We see that every week, and as I said, it doesn't matter what size of business it is. It's not just the small businesses that are struggling.
Yeah, and then what also doesn't help is that the goalposts are changing so quickly at the moment, as well as regulation generally is tightening, and companies at the top of a supply chain, they're now starting to look at their scope 3 emissions, so they're now looking at their supply chain and then challenging them to do more and more stuff. And so every time a business feels like they've got it under control, it's now you need to give us this and you need to give us this. So it's just really hard work essentially, and there's some good guidance out there, but businesses struggle to find it a lot of the time. So people just feel lost. I think it's probably a good way of.
I'm surprised we got 10 minutes in before we mentioned scope 3. I was expecting it to be 30 or 40 seconds in, so we all did quite well there.
Absolutely. Let's talk about scope 3. Now, I think the point that you made, Laurence, about procurers and getting procurement right, or maybe not getting procurement right, I mean, that's kind of central to what we're trying to do as a not-for-profit organisation, is to help people to procure better for sustainability outcomes. And, you mentioned, a lot of questions. I see it as well all the time, a lot of questions and things coming down the tube with this assumption that the supply chain understands what you're talking about, which often isn't the case. How are you seeing procurement? Do you see examples of good practice in sustainable procurement? And there may be some examples of where companies are getting it really wrong, because I think our listeners would learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I've actually been looking forward to this conversation because I've got a very good anecdote from a conversation this week, which is lucky. So it's very fresh in the mind. So I can give some examples of what I think we can consider bad procurement that just wasn't intended to be so. And in the flip side of that, where it can be procurement can be really good, it's all to do with, in my opinion, in our opinion, providing the supplier flexibility to be able to decide what's best for them when it comes to sustainability and not being too prescriptive. So great example this week, one of our clients is a small provider of products to various parts of the public sector. And obviously public sector, a lot going on with sustainable procurement, especially with the new Procurement Act and everything that's changing with social value. They are a really great business, have done amazing things, especially on the social side of sustainability, won loads of awards, done really well, very much punching above their weight as a small business. And they have recently lost a contract that they previously held with a public sector customer. And the reason they lost the contract was because the procurement process for that customer changed, and now they wanted all social value elements of that of procurement. All of the weighting and the score was based on providing local social value, but the customer is in Wales and our client is here in Manchester. So even though they've done really great things, they've ended up losing out because we've moved social value in public sector is moving towards localization now, and you have to be able to show that you're providing local social value to the customer. Very difficult when you're a long way away, and obviously them as the supplier are trying to provide local social value in their own local community. So there's a little bit of conflict there and contradiction, and the outcome of that is not really optimal for anybody, because that customer has then had to go with a local supplier, obviously, who could provide demonstration of social value locally, but there wasn't a supplier that it was clear was definitely going to be able to fulfill the contract. So you've ended up with the customer has now made a risky decision on a supplier that may not be able to fulfill, because their procurement process was quite prescriptive over how you deliver sustainability. And obviously we all want local social value, but there's two sides of local. There's supplier and customer, and you need to balance that out. So that's a really good example of where you've ended up with a suboptimal outcome for all parties, really, and you've introduced a lot of risk into your supply chain, and that's unfortunately something that we see more and more. But it's the prescriptive, being too prescriptive. Sometimes we'll see things around people being asked questions on, we want you to do stuff on renewable energy, or we want, show us your carbon offsetting program, and then you're sort of pushing people to having to invest in those areas, when actually we spend all of our time helping businesses look at their own impact and work out where's the best return on investment? Where do you actually get the best bang for your buck in terms of impact, say on reducing your carbon footprint? But if then you've got a procurement process that's saying, no, we want you to do something over here, but actually we know that that's not necessarily the best return, it's not going to deliver the best impact, but you've been too prescriptive, and then you've ended up with this suboptimal outcome, really. So on the flip side, really good procurement is where, and I know this is hard because we're moving towards everything needs to be quantified and demonstrated in numbers, but allowing for some level of flexibility so that you can provide the best level of sustainability in a way that works for you as a supplier, so that you have the best impact. Allowing people to do, every supplier is going to be different, right? Every company has a slightly different profile of their emissions, say. So a good procurement process should allow that sort of flexibility to say, you tell us what's really good about what you do and the impact, rather than we telling us tell you what we want you to do. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of building on that, one of your earlier comments, Laurence, was another good example of good practice is a friend of mine, actually. She was fresh out of university and she managed to get a job for a pretty large corporation as the customer sustainability manager, I think was the job title. And her whole job role and responsibility is designed to help them engage with their supply chain, acknowledging that they are getting more rigorous with their standards and it's really hard for them to comply. And nobody wants to lose a supplier if they really like them. Everyone wants to keep them. So they've acknowledged that that's a risk to the business. As important as sustainability is to them, it's also a risk, because if suppliers lose or drop out, then that's not great. So her whole job role is to support the supply chain with sustainability expertise. So putting on webinars and training and being a point of contact for any questions that people have, particularly focused on this issue. And that's obviously something that carries an economic cost, because that's a whole job role there. But I know that's been really successful for the organisation. I know all the webinars are really well attended, and they do those in person now and offer a lot of great support. So that's sort of, in a way, an extreme offer, because it's not just like publish a document or a guidance piece of material in some way, but that's been really helpful for that company.
Yeah. I've just sort of another really good example as well. It's one of our favourite case studies here in Manchester. Is a schoolwear supplier, and this is from the procurement supply chain management perspective. So them as a procuring party, they have textile suppliers from all over the world, developing countries, and a couple of years ago they found an instance of child labour at one of their partner factories. And obviously as the buyer, they could have flipped out, they could have penalised the supplier, they could have tried to find an alternative supply route. There's a lot of strong reactions they could have had. But what they did is they took time to understand why that happened. And it turned out that there was a young girl that was working at the factory. And the reason she was working was because she was the only breadwinner for her family, because she had two disabled parents who couldn't work. So what do you do in that scenario? Because if obviously we don't want any child labour in supply chains, at the same time that family has to eat. So what they did in the end, the company decided to continue to pay her a full salary, but instead paid her to go to school. So the family still get paid. You remove the child labour from the supply chain, and that's just a great social value story. It was something they were celebrated for. It's just a fantastic example of taking time to understand how do you put your best foot forward for all parties involved in a sustainability problem in a supply chain. We love that example, don't we? I feel like I bring that up a lot.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah,
they're really proud. Like, I always feel weird mentioning it because child labour is such a bad thing, but they dealt with it so well and they talk about it so loud and proud the way they dealt with it. It's just a great story.
Yeah.
Lots to unpick here then in terms of the way in which relationships between buyers and suppliers happen. And, in one of your examples, you're talking about kind of investing in upskilling the supplier. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. I founded the Supply Chain Sustainability School in 2012 in the construction sector with my co-director in Epsom. And for me, that's all about keeping your supply competitive. And I think in some of the examples you've given us, these very inflexible, I send this question out and I want precisely this answer out of it. What happens then is that the companies who are able to comply or to offer the things that are being asked for in the first place win the business, and others fall by the wayside. In your example about the Welsh public sector example, well, that supplier that lost the contract will go somewhere else and do some business elsewhere and probably won't even bother to bid to the public sector client in the future. And what happens then, of course, is you end up with a smaller and smaller pool of suppliers. And what happens when you have a small pool of suppliers and a large amount of demand? Basic O-level economics, the price goes up. And then, therefore, people will go, sustainable procurement, it costs more. No, it doesn't, it shouldn't. But bad procurement will cost more. And I think your example there is a microcosm of bad procurement. And also the issue of investing then in skills, in upskilling the supply chain, seems to be very important. And again, it's all about maintaining that competitiveness. We talked about the, kind of the business value of doing these things. I think that's really quite critical that, we can all make that happen. And, there's lots of, you've already quoted lots of really good and bad examples of how we can make that work. Thanks very much to Graeme and Laurence. This is part 1 of 2 of our series of podcasts with them. In part 2, we explore in a bit more depth some of the challenges around Scope 3 carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our podcast on Sense and Sustainability. Please listen out for more episodes. For more information, learning resources, tools, and much more content on sustainable procurement, go to www.iso2400.org.